Hi, I'm Kate from craftyattic.com. I'm going to show you how I've made this faux taxidermy sheep's head. So the first thing I'm going to need is some tin foil, and I'm just ripping it off into little balls, and I'm just making a framework, a kind of armature that I can use to put my clay on to form the taxidermy form that I'm going to use. So I'm just pulling off lumps, putting them together, and just mushing them. I'm not actually squeezing too tightly because I want there to be a bit of a give in it later on. So I'm just giving myself something to put the clay on. Otherwise it would be half a ton of clay, it would cost a fortune, and it'd be really heavy. So this allows me just to build a clay shell really for my sheep's head. So I've kind of got a rough sheep shape there. I've got some Das modelling clay. I like to use this. It's very clean to use. It's really easy. It's only about £5.50 a kilo. If you come to my website you can see a link there where you can get some of this stuff. You can use papier-mâché, but the trouble with papier-mâché is it does rot after a little while. It goes mouldy, and this Das stuff doesn't, and it doesn't shrink too much either when it's drying. It'll dry within 1 or 2 days. So I've got some 30mm cabochons there, which I'm just putting into the little clay form that I'm making here, so that I know exactly where the eyes are going to go, and I leave enough space for them. It also helps me to see how things are going really. So just keep adding little bits of clay. You can push it around until you're happy with it. If you get to the end of a day and you're not quite finished, but you don't want it to dry overnight, just wrap it up in some of your tin foil, it'll be fine. Or if it does dry, you can sand it down, or you can add more to it. So this Das stuff is quite easy to work with. So I'm just fiddling around a little bit with the eye sockets now, making sure that I get the eyes where I want them. And I'll show you how to make those little glass cabochons into eyes in a second. This is my finished form now. That's what it's actually going to look like underneath. So I just need to let that dry for a while. So I've actually made a pattern here for sheep's eyes for different size cabochons. We've got 40, 30, 25, 14mm things. You can download this from the website. It's a small charge just to keep everything going, and you can see you put your cabochon on top, and then I'm just using this is glossy accents, but you just need any very clear glue. So put plenty of the glue on. Don't worry if you've got too much, because it will squish out in a minute, and then you just need to press really hard, and you can see all the bubbles and the cloudiness disappear there, and your little sheep's eye will come into view. So you just need to let these dry now overnight. Just leave them alone, and then in the morning you'll find that you've got two beautifully glossy eyeballs there. You can just cut them out with a pair of scissors, and then they are ready to go. If you want to be super anal, you can use the same glue that you use to stick the eyeball backs on, just to finish off the backs of these, just to waterproof them and seal everything. So just cover the backs in the same glue, and again allow them to dry, and there you've got two lovely sheep's eyes that look exactly right. And obviously with these sheets you can make as many pairs of eyes as you need to. So I've got a selection of cream coloured materials and lace and all sorts of things here, and I'm actually going to make the fabric that I'm going to cover my sheep with. So I've got here a felting machine. This is just a really cheap toy one really, but it does the job. So I've got various bits of this fabric. I'm going to rip it because I want it to look quite tattered and torn when it's finished. And I've got a piece of white felt here. I guess that's about 12 inches square, something like that, because I think that's about the size I'm going to need to cover my sheep's head. So all I'm doing is just mushing and smushing these fabrics together. Now, a felting machine, if you haven't used one before or haven't seen one before, it's got a little cartridge on it. Instead of a sewing machine needle, there are 12 needles with barbs on them, and the barbs just basically smash the fibres of the fabrics together. So you're making one piece of fabric that's a bit smushed and mushed up together. It's quite strong. It's really good fun to do. It doesn't take very long at all. so it gives you a really nice effect. If you don't have one of these machines, you can actually use a sewing machine and just use a freeform foot on it, just put little stitches everywhere over all of your fabrics, and that will produce pretty much the same effect. So I've got my clay form here. It's dry. I've let it dry for a couple of days now. It's been sat on top of my central heating boiler, and it has shrunk slightly, so I'm just trying to ease those eyes back into their sockets. I'm cutting out a little bit of the clay just so that they sit in there quite nicely. I want to stick these in nice and firmly before I do too much more to this, because I want them to be there and stay put. So I'm using some clear silicone. You can use silicone glue, but you know it's really expensive buying little tiny tubes for £2.99, £3 each. So if you just have a tube of this clear Unibond or whatever brand it is you like, silicone, it's just builder's adhesive. It'll be a lot cheaper for you in the long run because you've got a lot more glue there, and you'll just, you can just keep going with it. So what I'm doing, sorry about my headshot there, what I'm doing is just cutting pieces of white felt and gluing them to the form. So I've got here a kitchen spatula that I'm using to spread the glue, and just placing it on the form, trimming little bits away where necessary so that it all fits quite neatly, and that will just put a bit of a squishy layer that we can sew to if we want to on top of our clay form. So it just gives the piece, when it's finished, gives it a little bit more give, and makes it feel a little bit more of a kind of fabric texture, really. So you see, I'm using actually an air erasable fabric pen there, just to mark where the little pieces need cutting so that they all fit together nicely around this form. I've had so much fun doing this project, it's great, and I started it because there was nothing on YouTube really about how to do faux taxidermy, so I thought, well, I'll give it a go, and this is what I've come up with. It's really good fun. So I've covered the whole piece now with the white felt, and I'm now going to stick the eyeballs in. Now the stripe on the middle of a sheep's eyeball is level with the top of his head, so we need to make sure that we get both eyeballs pointing in the right direction, otherwise we'll have a sheep with a bit of a squint. So I'm just fiddling around with the eyeballs still, just trying to make sure that they're in the right place. And you can see that the whole form now is covered with the felt fabric. I'm just twisting the eyeballs around a bit more to make sure they're facing the right direction and they've got the right angle on them. And this obviously now is quite wet and sticky because this silicone glue does take a little while to dry. So I'm going to put it to one side overnight, and this is the next morning, magically. I'm just now using my air erasable pen to mark pieces in exactly the same way as I've done with the white pieces of felt. I'm now using the coloured fabric that I mushed up earlier with my felting machine. I'm being a little bit more careful about the pieces that I'm cutting because I want them to be fairly symmetrical on either side, but you know what, it doesn't really matter because this fabric is so mushed together and it's kind of patchworky and a bit disjointed anyway. Nobody's going to notice. So I'm using my glue technique again with my kitchen spatula, which is never going to be used in the kitchen again, and I'm just now sticking in exactly the same way, sticking this fabric that I've made onto the felt on the form. I'm going to leave the mouth a bit rough because that will need stitching in later, but everything else I'm just going to now cover with this fabric. Obviously if you wanted to, you could use a like a fake fur or something like that, or anything you've got. Corduroy I think would look really good. If you've got an old pair of man's corduroy trousers and you wanted to do an animal head, I think that it would look quite good in that. There's no reason you can't use exactly the same technique. You just don't have to make your own fabric up. So I'm still going here, just snipping out little bits where I need to make it fit, and cutting and gluing in exactly the same way. This has been loads of fun, So So it's still going. I'm using the air erasable pen here, obviously because I want the pen marks to disappear eventually. I don't want them showing on the outside of my finished work. And that's a great thing about an air erasable pen, is that you've got the marks there while you need them, and in a couple of days they'll just fade away to nothing. On the ones that we sell on Crafty Attic, there's actually there is an eraser in the other end, so if you want them gone sooner, just use the eraser and those marks will just disappear. So carry on gluing. I am actually loving this Unibond glue, the Unibond clear silicone. It does not smell. A lot of silicones can have a very acidic smell to them and they stink the place out, but this hasn't been too bad at all. I think it's about £9 or £10 for an entire tube, so you can afford to splash it on all over. So there we are, still going, matching up my pieces nicely. You want to get them as close to each other as you possibly can, but it doesn't matter if there's a little tiny gap. That will be taken care of in a minute when we do our next stage and we stitch these pieces together. So again, just marking out the pieces that I want with my air erasable pen, cutting them and then gluing them. So I've nearly finished with this stage now. You don't have to worry about letting this dry before you move on to the next stage. You could do, but I found it's actually quite helpful to do it when the silicone is still wet. So what I'm doing now is I'm just using a regular machine thread. I think this is a Gutermann cream thread, just a single strand of it, and I'm stitching those pieces together. I want to do this for a number of reasons. I don't want them peeling off, not that I really believe they will in the future because that silicone glue is rather good, but I want to lend this sort of stitched quality to the faux taxidermy, because I think the fact that it is stitched and it is handmade just adds to the whole faux-ness of it really. So I'm just going around stitching all of the bits, and then I'm just going to cover the rear of the taxidermy head with felt. I haven't removed the armature. You could do, but I haven't done it because I think that in parts my clay may be very, very thin and I don't want to run the risk of it collapsing, having spent so much time on it. So I'm just going to leave it in there, it's not going to hurt. So I'm just using a standard thread here and a standard whip stitch to put this felt backing on the head. We're making some good progress with this now. I'm going to work on the mouth, so I'm just basically trimming this around so that it is going to go in, and I'm putting a little piece of pink felt here I've got made out of an old wool blanket. I'm going to use that for the inside of the mouth, and I'm just going to cut the other bits so that they're the right length, and I'm stitching them together so that he has, or she has, a little tiny reveal into the mouth and you can just see the inside. So I'm going to tack it first. I'm going to tack the mouth and the lips into place with this regular machine thread, just so that it's all behaving itself and doing what I want it to do. The stickiness of the glue, you can feel it a little bit on your needle and on the thread, but I'm not actually concerned about it. It's clear, you won't see it on the thread at the end of the day, and it does actually make everything very well behaved. It stays where you put it, so your stitches are not going to come out. They're going to be quite literally kind of glued in really. So if you do let it dry, that's absolutely fine. It might be better to do it when it's wet even, because when it's dry that silicone does form quite a rubbery film, and that can be, it's not impossible to stitch through, but it's harder. If you do find that your needle is getting a little bit stuck and it's difficult to pull through, just a little tiny pair of jewellery pliers or something, just give that little needle a tug and it will come through, no problem at all. So you can see I've nearly finished tacking the mouth and the lips of this sheep here. So I've got some brown felt and a little chalk pencil, and I'm just drawing a rough outline of where the nose should be on this sheep. Sheep have kind of heart-shaped noses, which is very cute. So I'm just cutting a piece of felt, and I'll fiddle away with that until it looks how I want it to. It's a bit too fat at the bottom, so we'll just chop a bit of that away. Might do away with it entirely in a minute, I think. There we are. So just cutting and shaping. You'll remember on the form there's a kind of little dip where I put my thumbs into the end to form nostrils, so I'm just tracing that onto this piece of felt so that it's going to fit then nicely on the end of this sheep's nose. So I'm just using my tacking thread just to tack this down. Again, the stitches I think add to the charm of faux taxidermy. I like to see them. I've used the cream stitches on this because if you used brown ones you'd see the stitches on the flesh of the sheep's face, so you know you can't win either way really. So just tacking that down nice and loosely. And then I've got now a DMC embroidery thread, 2 strands of dark brown, roughly the same shade as my felt, and I'm just making a series of stitches to form the little kind of cleft underneath the nose of the sheep that goes down into the sheep's lips. And then I'm going to use these threads. You see it can be a little bit tricky to pull through, but just a little pair of jewellery pliers can do that for you, sort that out. I'm going to use these same threads to do the outline of the sheep's lips, because this sheep that I like the look of has black outline to his lips, and you can see his mouth quite clearly. It's quite a defined mouth. So I'm now just using a satin stitch embroidery thread really, just to go all the way around these lips and up into the corners of the mouth. If you should find that you've got any little white bits poking through between your stitches, like I have, you can just use a pro marker pen. These are permanent marker pens, come in various colours. Just touch those in and those threads will disappear. So what I've done now is I've marked on my sheep using my air erasable pen where I want the eyes sockets and eyebrows to be on this sheep, and I'm going to make them now and form these eyelids and the whole eye thing. So I've drawn it with my air erasable pen onto the sheep. I've traced it then onto a piece of tracing paper. I'm just checking that both eyes will work, and they will. So I'm just cutting out my tissue paper template now. I'm going to use this then to form the eyelids and the eye sockets and the eyebrows. So I'm cutting out that template, and then I'm just going to pin it onto my the fabric that I made, cut it out. So I'm going to need 2 of these, so make 2 of them. So I need to then make a template for exactly where the eyelids need to be, where the opening needs to be. So I've used a piece of tissue paper again, marked exactly where the eye slit is, and marked where I want the eye opening to be, and then cut the centre where it's marked out of my piece of fabric, and then I can use the same template just to flip it over and cut the other one. So you can see that now fits over the eyeball. You can just fiddle around with it and clip away at it until it looks like you wish it to. So that's probably about right. And we'll do the other one the same. So that we can use the one we've already cut as a template there. Okay, so they're both the same. I'm going to use the same DMC thread that I used for the mouth. I'm just going to do a neat little blanket stitch all the way around the inside of this eye, on these eyebrows and eyelids and things, just to hide the white felt, but also to add a little bit of definition and crispness really to the look of this sheep's eyes. So we're going to give him some nice eyeliner really, isn't it? All the way around. So just blanket stitch all the way around. Doesn't take too long. And I'm just drawing in, there's some like little tear stains that sheep get just underneath their eyes, so I'm just going to sew these in using 2 strands of the same colour DMC. I'm not being really accurate about this at all. I'm just doing little tiny slashy stitches just to kind of barely suggest this tear stain on the sheep. So now I've finished making my eyelids pieces. I'm just pinning it to the form here. I'm getting ready to stitch it on, so I'm just pinning them to make sure that they both look like they're in the right place before I start stitching them on. So I'm just using a single strand of a regular machine thread here. Again, this is like a Gutermann cream cotton, I think. Not worrying too much about these stitches and their neatness at all, actually, because like I say, the fact that it is stitched and you've got some quite large stitches just adds to its charm. So to give me the proper effect of eyebrows and eyelids and things, I need to put a little bit of stuffing in, and I'm using some brown felting wool that I happen to have. So I'm just using the eye of a bodkin just to shove that into the gaps to give me a bit of a rounded eye, and then I'm using a felting needle just to push this wool in to the right position. Just felt it a little bit so that it's all staying there and I've got no strands sticking out. And we're going to use some sculpting stitches in a minute just to make everything look okay. So I've stuffed around the eyeball with this brown wool. I'm now using just a cream machine stitch. I'm actually coming up underneath the eyelid, a little stitch through the eyelid, and then pull back out to the edge of the eye. So if you can imagine that you've got a round eyeball under there, there would be a kind of roundness around that eyeball. So I'm using these stitches just to shape the fabric that I've just stitched around that eye. I've got some bits and pieces I've clipped out of a lace tablecloth here, and I'm just going to stitch a couple of these bits on my sheet because I think they look really nice, and it'll just add to the texture and the kind of textile look of this piece. So just using some tacking stitches to stitch this on. Again, I'm not worrying about the tacking stitches. If they're big, so be it. Stitching very accurately on a form like this is not all that easy because it hasn't got that much give in it. We've only got the 2 layers of felt, obviously, and you can't manipulate a bend out of it, so you have to kind of be a little bit careful about where you're putting your needle so that you can get it back out again, but it's doable. So I've stitched some bits of lace there on the head and on the neck. I'm going to stick some ears on. So I've had a look at some sheep ears. I quite like these ears. I'm going with these ears. And I've got some super stiff, extra stiff surf here. You can get that on the craftyattic.com website. This is a mesh. It doesn't fray when you cut it. If you get it wet, it will set into the shape that you put it into. So I'm just trimming away, making sure that this, I'm going to use this as a template. And I'm also going to use it to stiffen the inside of the ear. So the first thing I need is to cut 2 pieces of this extra stiff surf and cut my ear shapes out. And I've made some pink fabric for the inside of the ear. So in exactly the same way as I made the fabric for the rest of the sheep head, I've mushed and smushed these pieces of pink fabric together to make the insides for my sheepy ears, and I'm using these pieces as templates. I'm going to cut around them about 6mm, something like that, because that's the width of a machine foot from the center to the outside. So I can just then guide my machine foot around it. I'm actually going to use the surf itself, I think, as a guide in this instance, and I'm just going to stitch around when it's done. So that's the inside of my ears. Obviously I need an outside as well, so I'm using the fabric that I prepared before, the same fabric that I've used for the rest of the sheep. And I've come up a little bit short, so I quickly manufacture some extra to do the other ear with, and then just attach my surf back. So I've got these two pieces now, right sides together, the pink piece and the cream piece, and this surf on the top. I've stitched round. I'm going to stitch round here and leave the bottom open, so that I've got some turning room. So just taking the pins out now that I've run those stitches, clipping out the corners so that it will turn quite easily. I was going to leave the surf in, but it turns out it's impossible to turn it with that in there, so I'm clipping it out, and I'll worry about that later. So just turning the ear then, using a pair of scissors just to make sure all the points and all the seams are as open as they should be, clipping a little bit off the inside, or the outside edges, sorry, of that surf so that it fits inside that ear, and just using the scissors to make sure everything's where it should be. So I'm going to clip about 1/2 inch off the bottom of that surf so that I can turn the bottom of these ears in, and then just whip stitch them together so that all of the raw edges are on the inside and it's a nice neat job. So I've got my ears, and I'm going to use my trusty air erasable pen again to mark where I need to stitch these ears. So I'm putting the ears on where I want them and in the position I want them, tracing round with the air erasable pen, and I'm just going to then stitch them into place. This is by far and away the most difficult thing, actually. You just have to use really big stitches and pull them nice and tight. So I'm using a double thread. I'm using a pair of pliers to get the needle through, and just stitch those ears on however you can. So just keep going until they're securely attached. If they're not the shape that you want them to be when you've finished, and you've got the surf on the inside, you can just get the ears wet and then fold them into, manipulate them into the shape that you want them to be. Use clothes pegs or anything you need to make it set the shape that you want. Leave them to dry, and then those ears will stay in the right shape. So I've got some false eyelashes. I love sticking false eyelashes on things, anything except me. These aren't quite long enough, so I'm going to use 2 sets on each eye because this sheep has got quite large eyes. So I've trimmed off the, you can see how they're going to go there. They're going to just sit on the brown bit of the sheep's eye. So I've cut off the very tapered bits at either end of 2 sets, and I'm going to use them to form one eyelash, one set of eyelashes. I'm using some instant super glue. I've painted the super glue onto the eyeball, and just now holding the eyelashes very briefly in place while the glue sets. So again, I'm going to clip off the tapered bit so that they look good when they're on the sheep. And this is this sheep nearly finished. So have a go, it's great fun. All you need is included in this video, a bit of that Das clay. I only used 1 kilo for this whole sheep's head, so that's about £5.50 a kilo, something like that. Go along to the Crafty Attic website, you'll find the things that you need there. Have a go, it's enormous fun. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get all of my new stuff as soon as it comes out. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you again soon with something new. Bye.